The giant metal arena stretched out like a silver mountain under the alien sky. Commander Hyuk had never seen anything so big in his life. The walls rose up so high that he could barely see the top, where thousands of strange creatures sat watching and waiting for blood. The floor was made of some kind of shiny metal that reflected the bright lights hanging from the ceiling like tiny sunshake. Sat on the cold floor with heavy chains around his wrists and ankles. The metal was so cold it made his skin hurt, but he did not care about that right now. His 12-year-old son, Day, was sitting next to him, pressed against the wall like he was trying to disappear. The boy had not spoken much since they were captured 3 weeks ago when the alien ships attacked their research vessel and killed his mother. The holding area smelled like fear and death. Dozens of other prisoners from different planets sat in their own chains. Some looked like humans, but with different colored skin or extra arms. Others were so strange that Hyuk could not even guess what planet they came from. All of them had the same look in their eyes, though. They all knew they were going to die today. 3 alien guards stood watching the prisoners. These creatures were much taller than humans, with 4 long arms and skin that looked like broken glass. Their faces had no nose, just 2 holes for breathing, and their eyes were completely black, like looking into empty space. They spoke in a language of clicks and hisses that sounded like angry insects. Hyuk understood some of their words because he had been forced to learn during the 3 weeks in captivity. The guards were talking about today's fights. They were laughing about how weak humans were and how they never lasted more than a few minutes in the arena. One guard said that human blood looked funny when it mixed with the metal floor. Another guard made a joke about how humans screamed differently than other species. The crowd noise from above got louder and louder. Hyuk could hear thousands of voices cheering and shouting. The sound echoed down through the metal corridors like thunder. Somewhere up there, alien nobles were placing bets on which prisoners would die first and which ones might last long enough to provide good entertainment. Day moved closer to his father and whispered, "Dad, I am scared." Hyuk wanted to tell his son that everything would be okay, but he could not lie to the boy. He had been a soldier before becoming a researcher, and he knew what this place was. He knew that very few prisoners ever walked out of here alive. Instead, he put his chained hands on his son's shoulder and said, "Stay close to me no matter what happens." The first fight of the day started, and they could hear the crowd go wild with excitement. The sound of metal hitting metal rang through the corridors, followed by a scream that was cut short. Then more cheering. The guards smiled, showing teeth that looked like broken glass. They were enjoying this. A few minutes later, they brought back the winner of the first fight. It was a creature that looked like a giant insect covered in its own green blood and the blood of whatever it had just killed. The thing was breathing hard, but it was alive. The guards patted it on the back like it was their favorite pet and gave it water and food. Then they brought out the body of the loser. Hyuk turned Day's head away so the boy would not see, but it was too late. Day had already seen what was left of the creature that had lost. The boy started shaking, and Hyuk pulled him closer. One of the guards noticed them watching and walked over. It looked down at them with its black eyes and said something in its clicking language that made the other guards laugh. Then it pointed at Day and said in broken human language, "Small human dies first today. Big crowd wants to see human child fight champion." Hyuk's blood turned to ice. He jumped to his feet as much as the chains would allow and shouted, "No, you cannot do this. He is just a child." The guard hit him across the face with one of its 4 hands, sending him back to the floor. The taste of blood filled his mouth. The guard leaned down close to Hyuk's face and whispered, "Child dies slow. Champion will play with small human before killing. Make good show for crowd. Father will watch and learn why humans are weak." The other guards laughed again like this was the funniest thing they had ever heard. Day was crying now, but trying to be quiet about it. He had heard what the guard said, even though he did not understand all the alien words. He looked at his father with eyes that were too old for his young face and said, "Dad, what did they say?" Hyuk could not answer because his throat felt like it was closed up tight. More fights happened above them. Each one seemed to make the crowd hungrier for blood. Each victory scream from the winners made the guards more excited. They started talking about which prisoner would go next and making bets among themselves about how long each one would last. The alien who seemed to be in charge came down to check on the prisoners. It was even bigger than the guards, with scars all over its glass like skin. It walked slowly past each prisoner looking them up and down like a farmer checking animals at market. When it got to Hyuk and Day, it stopped and stared for a long time. It said something to the guards in their clicking language, and they all nodded, and it pointed at Day and made a gesture with one of its hands across its throat. The meaning was clear. The boy would die today, and it would not be quick. The commander alien walked away, but turned back once to look at Hyuk with what might have been curiosity. It had probably seen many fathers watch their children die in this place, but something about the way Hyuk was looking back seemed to interest it. The alien tilted its head to one side, like it was trying to figure out a puzzle, then shrugged and continued walking. The noise from the arena got even louder as more fights finished. The guards were getting excited because they knew the main event was coming soon. The crowd always loved it when they brought out a child, especially a human child. The betting would be heavy and the entertainment would be memorable. One guard came over and started unlocking Day's chains. The boy looked at his father with pure terror in his eyes. "Dad, please do not let them take me." Hyuk struggled against his own chains so hard that the metal cut into his wrists, leaving streaks of blood on the floor. "Please," he shouted, "I will fight instead." "Take me, not him." The guard laughed and said, "Human father can watch human child die first, then human father die slow too for crowd." The other guards thought this was hilarious. They had done this many times before, and the reaction was always the same. Fathers begged, mothers screamed, children cried, but in the end they all died for the entertainment of the crowd. They lifted Day to his feet and started pushing him toward the tunnel that led to the arena floor. The boy looked back at his father one last time. His young face was streaked with tears, but he was trying to be brave for his dad. "I love you, Dad," he called out as they pushed him forward into the darkness. Hyuk screamed his son's name so loud that his voice echoed through all the tunnels and corridors. But no one cared about his pain. No one cared about his love for his boy. This was just another day at the arena, just another show for the crowd, just another human family being destroyed for alien entertainment. The boy disappeared into the tunnel, and Hyuk was left alone with his chains and his terror, waiting to watch his son die. The bright lights hit Day like a wall of fire as he was pushed out onto the arena floor. The boy had to cover his eyes with his small hands because the lights were so bright after the dark tunnels. The crowd noise was so loud it felt like the sound itself was hitting him from all sides. 20,000 alien voices screaming and cheering for his death. Day looked up at the stands and saw creatures he had never imagined in his worst nightmares. Some had tentacles instead of arms, others had heads, like giant insects with compound eyes that reflected the arena lights. There were beings made of what looked like living rock and others that seemed to be made of pure energy dancing in glass containers. All of them were excited to watch a human child die. The arena floor was perfectly smooth metal that reflected everything like a mirror. Day could see himself in it, small and scared and alone in the center of this massive space. The floor was so big that the far walls looked tiny from where he stood. He tried to run toward one of the walls, but his legs felt like they were made of water above him. On giant screens, his face appeared blown up so big that everyone in the arena could see his tears. The announcer was speaking in the alien language, but Day could guess what it was saying from the way the crowd laughed at and pointed at him. They were making fun of how scared he looked, how small he was, how pathetic humans were. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the lights he could hear his father's voice calling his name. Hyuk was screaming so loud that even over the crowd noise Day could make out the words, "Stay strong, son. Stay strong." But Day did not feel strong at all. He felt like he was going to fall down and never get back up. The metal floor in the center of the arena started making loud, grinding noises like giant machines were moving underneath. Day stepped back as cracks appeared in the smooth surface. Then sections of the floor began to rise and separate, revealing a dark hole that seemed to go down forever. Steam came up from the hole, carrying a smell like rotting meat and old blood. Something was coming up from below. Day could hear heavy footsteps echoing from the depths, getting louder and closer. The crowd went completely quiet for the first time since he had entered the arena. Everyone was waiting to see what would emerge from the underground chambers. The silence was somehow worse than all the screaming had been. First came the sound of breathing, deep and slow like a giant bellows. Then came the scraping of claws on metal. Then came the smell like death itself had crawled out of a grave. The thing that emerged from the hole was so big that at first Day thought it was some kind of machine. But then he saw it move and realized it was alive. The creature stood 4 meters tall with skin that looked like it was made of black metal plates. Its arms were longer than its body, and instead of hands it had curved blades that looked like they had been surgically attached. The thing's head was shaped like a skull, but with too many teeth and eyes that glowed red in the arena lights. This was Gorth, the champion of the arena, the creature that had never lost a fight in over 5 years, the thing that had killed 300 prisoners from dozens of different planets. It looked down at the small human boy and made a sound that might have been laughter, but sounded more like metal being torn apart. The crowd exploded back into noise. As Gorth raised his blade arms above his head in a victory salute, they chanted his name over and over again, Gorth, Gorth. The sound echoed around the arena like thunder. The betting screens around the arena showed the odds for this fight, and they were not even close. Everyone knew how this would end. They tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go. The energy barriers around the arena were too high to climb, and they buzzed with electricity that would kill anyone who touched them. The only way out was through Gorth, and that was no way out at all. The boy looked around desperately for somewhere to hide, but the arena floor was completely empty. Gorth started walking toward him slowly, like it had all the time in the world. The creature was enjoying this moment, savoring the fear it could smell coming from the small human it had fought. Warriors and monsters and killers, but never anything as helpless as a child. This would be entertaining in a different way. The boy started to run, but his legs were shaking so badly he could barely stay upright. Gorth moved faster, now taking huge steps that covered the arena floor in seconds. The creature was playing with him, letting him run just far enough to think he might escape before cutting off his path. They stumbled and fell hard on the metal floor, skinning his knees and hands. The crowd cheered louder as blood appeared on the shiny surface. Gorth stood over him now, blocking out the lights with its massive body. The creature's red eyes looked down at the boy like he was nothing more than an insect to be stepped on. The boy tried to crawl away, but Gorth put one massive foot in front of him, blocking his path. Then the creature reached down with one blade arm and grabbed Day by his shirt, lifting him off the ground like he weighed nothing. The crowd was going completely wild, now screaming and cheering as their champion prepared for the kill. Dad, Day whispered, but his voice was lost in the noise of the crowd. Dad, please help me. But his father was locked in chains far below and could do nothing but listen to his son's final moments. The boy closed his eyes and thought about his mother who had died when the aliens attacked their ship. He would see her again soon. Gorth raised his other blade arm high above his head. The crowd counted down in their alien language, 5, 4, 3, 2. The creature looked up at the crowd, enjoying their bloodlust, enjoying their excitement, enjoying the power. He held over life and death. The blade came down fast and sharp, piercing through the boy's chest and lifting him higher into the air. Day opened his eyes one last time and looked out into the darkness where he knew his father was watching. Dad, he whispered with his last breath, I love you. The words were so quiet that only Gorth heard them. The champion slammed the boy's body down onto the arena floor with enough force to crack the metal surface. Blood spread out in a perfect circle around the small form, staining the reflective floor. The crowd went completely insane with joy, jumping up and down and throwing things into the arena. Gorth stood over his victim and roared in triumph. The sound was so loud it shook the entire arena structure. The creature had won again in the most brutal way possible. The crowd loved it, the betting houses loved it, the arena owners loved it. This was what they had paid to see. For 37 seconds, the arena was filled with pure celebration. Money changed hands as bets were settled. Aliens congratulated each other on a good show. Vendors sold food and drinks to the excited crowd. Gorth basked in the adoration of his fans, raising his bloody blade arms to accept their worship. But then something happened that had never happened before in the history of the arena, something that made the crowd slowly grow quiet, something that made the guards look at each other with confusion, something that would change everything forever in the holding chambers. Far below the celebrating crowd, Commander Hyuk stopped screaming. He stopped struggling against his chains. He stopped making any sound at all. The sudden silence was more terrifying than all his shouting had been. The guards noticed the change, but they did not understand what it meant. They were about to learn what happened when someone hurt a human child. They were about to discover what a human father could become when he had nothing left to lose. They were about to find out why humans were The most dangerous species in the galaxy when they were pushed beyond their breaking point. The celebration continued above, but below in the darkness something had changed forever. The man who had been dragged into this place as a helpless prisoner was gone. In his place sat something else, something cold and calculating and utterly without mercy, something that would make them all pay for what they had done to his son. The sound that came from Commander Hyuk was not human. It started deep in his chest, like the growl of some ancient predator that had been sleeping for millions of years. The alien guards had heard many prisoners scream and cry and beg, but they had never heard anything like this sound. It made their glass-like skin crawl with instinctive fear. Hyuk sat perfectly still in his chains, but everything about him had changed. His eyes were no longer the eyes of a desperate father. They were cold and empty, like looking into deep space. His breathing had become slow and controlled like a machine. His hands, which had been shaking with emotion just minutes before, were now perfectly steady. The guards watched in confusion as the human seemed to transform before their eyes. They had seen many prisoners break when their loved ones died. Some went completely insane, others became catatonic with grief, but this was different. This was something they had never seen before, and it scared them in ways they could not understand. 20 years of military training that had been buried under years of peaceful research suddenly came flooding back to the surface. Hyuk remembered every lesson from Special Forces school, every combat technique, every way to kill an enemy with bare hands. His mind began working like a tactical computer, analyzing his situation and calculating possibilities. The chains that held him were designed for the average strength of most galactic species. They were strong enough to hold creatures twice the size of humans, but they had not been tested against human physiology under extreme stress. Human adrenaline, human desperation, and most importantly, human rage could push the body beyond normal limits. Hyuk began studying his restraints with the eye of an engineer and the mind of a soldier. The metal was strong, but it had weak points where different pieces joined together. The locks were electronic, but they had manual backup systems. The guards carried keys and weapons and communication devices that could be useful. The first guard noticed that the human had stopped making noise and walked over to investigate. It leaned down close to Hyuk's face and said something mocking in its clicking language, expecting to see tears or terror or hopelessness. Instead, it found itself looking into eyes that held nothing but cold calculation and promise of death. Before the guard could react, Hyuk moved his right hand, twisted in a way that should have broken bones, but instead exploited the exact weak point in the chain design. The metal link snapped with a sharp crack. His freed hand shot forward faster than the guard could follow and struck the creature at the base of its throat, where its breathing apparatus was most vulnerable. The guard dropped like a stone, clutching its throat and making choking sounds as it struggled to breathe. The second guard reached for its weapon, but Hyuk was already moving again, using his momentum to swing his body around and snap the chain on his left wrist. The freed chains became weapons as he whipped them through the air. The second guard managed to draw its energy weapon, but Hyuk had anticipated this. He rolled behind the first guard, using its body as a shield, while his hands found the equipment belt around its waist. His fingers located the control device for the prisoner restraints and activated it with movements too quick to follow. All around the holding area, chains began releasing as every prisoner's restraints opened automatically. The other captives looked around in confusion, not understanding what had happened, but Hyuk was not interested in leading a prison break. He had only one goal now, and everything else was just a distraction. The second guard fired its weapon, but the energy blast hit the first guard instead. As Hyuk continued using the choking creature as a mobile shield, he worked his way closer to the armed guard, using techniques he had learned in urban combat scenarios. His movements were precise and economical, wasting no energy on unnecessary actions. When he was close enough, Hyuk dropped the first guard and lunged forward in one fluid motion. His hand closed around the second guard's weapon while his other hand struck pressure points along the creature's arm. The guard screamed as its limb went numb and the weapon fell to the floor. Hyuk caught the energy weapon before it hit the ground and in the same motion struck the second guard in the center of its forehead with the butt of the weapon. The guard collapsed unconscious. Both aliens were down and Hyuk was armed and free. It had taken him less than 90 seconds. The other prisoners were milling around in confusion, some trying to escape, others just standing there in shock. They did not understand what had just happened or why the human had not freed them first. Some called out to him asking for help or leadership, but Hyuk ignored them completely. He stripped the guards of their equipment, taking their weapons, their communication devices, their access cards, and their armor. He put on pieces of the alien gear that fit and discarded the rest. His movements were methodical and efficient. Like a machine built for war, he had become something that existed only to complete a mission. The simple, every alien in this facility who had participated in his son's murder would pay. The ones who had cheered would suffer. The ones who had bet on the fight would regret it. The ones who had organized it would die, and Gorth, the creature that had killed his boy, would experience pain beyond imagination. Hyuk accessed the guard's communication device and began downloading facility schematics, security protocols, guard rotations, and maintenance schedules. The information flowed into his mind, where his military training organized it into tactical plans. He learned the location of power systems, weapon storage areas, command centers, and escape routes, but he was not planning to escape. He was planning something much more ambitious. He was going to turn this entire facility into a weapon. He was going to make every creature in this place understand what it meant to hurt a human child. He was going to send a message that would echo across the galaxy. The first phase was infiltration. He needed to move through the facility without being detected until he was in position to begin the real work. The maintenance tunnels would provide cover, and the chaos from the prisoner release would distract the guards. He had maybe 10 minutes before they realized what had happened. Hyuk moved toward the tunnel access with the fluid grace of a predator. His training had taught him how to move silently, how to avoid detection, how to strike from shadows. The aliens had made a terrible mistake when they killed his son. They had awakened something that should have stayed buried. As he disappeared into the tunnel system, the other prisoners were still standing around, confused and afraid. They did not understand that they had just witnessed the birth of something legendary. They had seen a human father transform into an instrument of vengeance that would reshape how the galaxy viewed humanity. Above them in the arena, the crowd was still celebrating. Gorth was still basking in applause. The wealthy aliens were still counting their winnings. The arena staff were already preparing for the next fight. None of them knew that death was now stalking through the tunnels beneath their feet. None of them understood that Commander Hyuk had stopped being a prisoner the moment his son died. None of them realized that they had just created the most dangerous enemy they could possibly imagine, a human being with nothing left to lose and all the skills necessary to make that loss everyone else's problem. The hunt was about to begin, and it would be unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen before. The maintenance tunnels beneath the arena were a maze of metal corridors, pipes, and service passages that stretched for kilometers in every direction. Most people would get lost in minutes, but Commander Hyuk moved through them like he had built the place himself. His military training included urban warfare and facility infiltration. He could read the tunnel system like a map. Every few meters he stopped to access service terminals, downloading more information about the arena complex. The aliens had built their facility assuming that any escaped prisoner would simply try to run away. They had never considered that someone might try to learn every detail of their operation and use it against them. The first security patrol he encountered never knew he was there. 3 guards walking through a main corridor while Hyuk moved silently through an air vent directly above them. He could have killed them easily, but that would have raised alarms. Instead, he followed them, listening to their radio chatter and learning their patrol routes. The alien staff he did encounter in the service areas were maintenance workers and technicians who were not trained for combat. When they saw him, they opened their mouths to scream, but the sounds never came. His hands moved with surgical precision, striking nerve clusters that shut down their vocal cords before rendering them unconscious. Each unconscious alien was stripped of useful equipment and hidden in storage compartments where they would not be found for hours. Hyuk was building an arsenal while simultaneously gathering intelligence. Every access card, every communication device, every tool added to his capabilities. The arena complex was massive, but Hyuk was beginning to understand its layout. The main power plant was located 3 levels down. The command center was on the top floor, surrounded by luxury boxes for wealthy spectators, the holding areas for creatures and weapons were spread throughout the middle levels, but most importantly, he had located Gorath's private quarters. The champion lived in luxury befitting his status with servants and guards, and all the comforts that came from being the arena's greatest killer. The creature was probably still celebrating its latest victory, completely unaware that its victim had a father who was coming for revenge. Hyuk began his real work by targeting the power systems. The aliens relied heavily on automated systems to run their facility. If he could disrupt their power grid in the right way, he could create chaos while maintaining control over key systems he would need later. The main power coupling was protected by multiple security measures, but none of them were designed to stop someone with advanced technical training working from inside the system. Hyuk bypassed the electronic locks using codes he had stolen from guard stations. Then he began making very specific modifications to the power flow. He was not trying to shut down the power completely. That would trigger emergency protocols and backup systems. Instead, he was creating carefully controlled instabilities that would cascade through the system in exactly the way he wanted. Lights would flicker in some areas while other sections would experience power surges. The beauty of his sabotage was that it would look like random equipment failures to the alien technicians. They would waste time trying to diagnose problems that did not actually exist while he continued moving through their facility. Like a ghost, every minute they spent confused was another minute he had to complete his mission. His next target was the creature containment systems. The arena kept dozens of dangerous aliens locked up for future fights. These beings were not prisoners. Like humans, they were predators and monsters that had been captured specifically because of their killing ability. If released, they would create perfect chaos. Hyuk accessed the containment control room through a maintenance shaft. The single technician on duty was reading something on his screen and did not notice the human dropping silently from the ceiling vent. The alien's throat was crushed before he could make a sound, and Hyuk was at the control panel. The system required multiple authorization codes to release the creatures, but Hyuk had been collecting these codes from every guard and technician he had encountered. The computer accepted his commands and began opening containment cells throughout the facility, one by one. The most dangerous creatures in the galaxy were set free. Alarms began sounding as sensors detected the open cells, but by then it was too late. The creatures were already loose and looking for targets. The arena staff had procedures for escaped prisoners, but nothing in their protocols covered what to do when their own monster collection turned against them. The chaos was immediate and brutal. Security teams that should have been looking for Hyuk were instead trying to contain alien predators that could tear through armor like paper. Evacuation routes became death traps as creatures that had been captured on distant planets took revenge on their captors. Through it all, Hyuk moved like a shadow, following routes he had mapped out while the facility tore itself apart. The security cameras showed him nothing but smoke and emergency lighting. The guards who might have spotted him were busy fighting for their lives against things with too many claws and teeth. He made his way to the armory where the arena's collection of weapons was stored. Everything from energy rifles to explosive devices to alien technology that could level buildings. The security here was much tighter, but the guards had been called away to deal with the creature emergency. Hyuk had all the access codes he needed, and the chaos outside provided perfect cover. He loaded himself with weapons and explosives, choosing items based on the tactical plan forming in his mind. He was no longer just trying to escape or get revenge. He was preparing to send a message that would be heard across the galaxy. The wealthy spectators in their luxury boxes were just beginning to realize that something was seriously wrong. Emergency announcements were telling them to remain calm while security dealt with technical difficulties, but the screams echoing through the facility suggested that this was more than a technical problem. Some of the alien nobles tried to leave but found that the main exits were blocked by security barriers that had activated automatically when the creature containment was breached. They were trapped in their expensive seats watching their entertainment facility turn into a war zone. The arena staff were running around in panic trying to follow emergency procedures that had never been tested in a real crisis. The command center was issuing contradictory orders, while field teams reported situations that made no sense. Everything was falling apart, and they could not understand why. Down in the tunnels, Hyuk continued his methodical advance toward his primary targets. He had weapons now and detailed knowledge of the facility layout. He had created chaos that would cover his movements and distract his enemies. Most importantly, he had eliminated most of the security forces that might have stopped him. The hunt was entering its final phase. Goroth was still in his quarters, probably wondering why the celebration had been interrupted by alarms. The arena commanders were in their control room, trying to regain control of their facility. The wealthy aliens who had cheered for his son's death were trapped in their boxes with nowhere to run. They had all participated in the murder of an innocent child for their entertainment. Now they were about to learn what that child had meant to his father. They were about to discover why humans were the most dangerous species in the galaxy. When someone they loved was threatened, they were about to pay the price for treating human life as a game. Commander Hyuk emerged from the tunnel system into the main facility armed and ready. His face showed no emotion, but his eyes burned with cold fire. The transformation was complete. The grieving father was gone. In his place was something that nightmares were made of: a human being with nothing left to lose and all the tools necessary to make his enemies pay. The final act was about to begin, and it would be written in blood and fire across the pages of galactic history. The first massive explosion shook the entire arena complex like an earthquake, causing thousands of alien spectators to fall from their seats as chunks of ceiling crashed down around them. The main power coupling that Hyuk had sabotaged finally overloaded, sending cascading failures through every system in the facility. Emergency lighting flickered on and off, creating a hellish strobe effect. But the power failure was only the beginning. Hyuk had spent his time in the tunnels doing more than just studying the facility. He had been placing explosives at key structural points, calculating exactly how much force would be needed to bring down specific sections while leaving others intact. This was not random destruction, this was controlled demolition. The wealthy alien nobles who had been trapped in their luxury boxes now found themselves in death traps as support beams groaned and walls cracked around them. These creatures who had spent their lives treating violence as entertainment were experiencing real terror for the first time. Panic spread through the upper levels as beings with too much money and too little courage discovered what fear actually felt like. The arena floor itself began to crack and buckle as underground explosions damaged the foundation. The pristine metal surface where they had died was now broken and twisted, a fitting grave marker for the boy whose death had started this chain of vengeance. The bloodstain was still there, darker now against the damaged metal. Emergency evacuation procedures activated, but Hyuk had anticipated this too. He had spent hours studying the facility blueprints and had sabotaged key exit routes. The main corridors that should have led to safety instead led to collapsed passages or areas now occupied by the escaped creatures. The aliens found themselves herded like animals into areas where Hyuk could control their movement. The command center was in chaos as facility managers tried to regain control of systems that were failing faster than they could be repaired. Their screens showed fires breaking out in multiple locations, security cameras going offline, and evacuation routes blocked by debris. The arena that had been their pride and joy was turning into their tomb. Commander Hyuk moved through the facility like death itself, systematically eliminating anyone who had been directly involved in his son's murder. He had memorized the faces of the guards who had dragged Day to the arena, the officials who had given the orders, the announcer who had made jokes about human weakness. Each one died quickly and silently, but the arena commanders, the ones who had built this place and made it profitable, they would not die quickly. They had made their fortune by selling death as entertainment. Now they would learn what real entertainment looked like when the roles were reversed. The first commander Hyuk found was cowering in a security office trying to send distress signals to the planetary authorities. The alien looked up as the door opened, expecting to see rescue personnel. Instead it saw a human covered in alien blood-carrying weapons that glowed with deadly energy. Please, the commander clicked in its native language. I was only following orders. I never personally hurt anyone. The alien had learned enough human speech to beg for its life, but Hyuk was not interested in pleas or excuses. He had heard this creature laughing when Day was taken to his death. You killed my son, Hyuk said in a voice that was perfectly calm and infinitely more terrifying than any scream. The alien opened its mouth to argue, but the energy blast that followed left nothing but silence and the smell of burned flesh. Each commander died in a different way. Some were shot, others were beaten to death with improvised weapons. One was thrown from a high window to crash on the arena floor, where so many prisoners had died before. The methods varied, but the message was always the same. This was what happened when you hurt a human child. The creatures who had placed bets on his son's death found themselves hunted through corridors that had become a maze of smoke and sparking electronics. These wealthy aliens who had treated murder as a game discovered what it felt like to be prey. They ran through the darkness calling for help that would never come. Some tried to hide in storage rooms or offices, but Yuck found them all. His military training included tracking and urban warfare techniques that made him invisible when he wanted to be invisible and unstoppable when he wanted to kill. The facility that had been designed to contain prisoners now contained their nightmares. The escaped creatures added to the chaos as they took revenge on their former captors. Alien predators that had been captured for the arena's entertainment were now hunting the staff that had kept them in cages. The screams echoing through the corridors came from beings that had thought themselves safe behind their technology and their barriers, but through all the chaos and destruction, Hyuk never lost sight of his primary target. Gorth, the champion who had killed his son, was still alive somewhere. In this facility, the creature that had murdered a child for the entertainment of others would pay the highest price of all. The champion's quarters were located in the most protected part of the arena, surrounded by guards and security systems. But the guards were dead or fighting for their lives elsewhere, and the security systems had been sabotaged hours ago. When Hyuk finally reached the ornate doors of Gorth's living space, there was nothing to stop him inside. The quarters were decorated with trophies from hundreds of victories, weapons, and armor from defeated opponents covered the walls, along with recordings of famous fights. The place was a monument to death and violence, built on the suffering of innocents who had been forced to die for entertainment. Tarath was waiting for him. The massive creature had armed itself with its favorite weapons and was standing in the center of the main room. Its red eyes glowed with anticipation rather than fear. This was what it lived for: combat and killing, and the chance to add another trophy to its collection. "You are the human fathers," it said in broken Galactic standard language. "Your child died well. I enjoyed killing it slowly." The creature was trying to provoke rage, to make Hyuk fight emotionally rather than tactically, but the human who stood before it was beyond rage. He had moved past emotion into something much more dangerous. "My name is Commander Hyuk." Hyuk replied calmly, "And you killed my son. Now you die." The words were spoken without heat, without anger. They were simply a statement of fact delivered by someone who had already decided the outcome of this encounter. Groth laughed, a sound like metal being torn apart, and raised its blade arms. "You are just human. You are weak like your child was weak. I will kill you slow like I killed it." But the creature made a critical error in its assessment. It was thinking of this as another arena fight with rules and expectations. This was not a fight. This was an execution. Hyuk moved with speed that surprised the alien champion, ducking under the first blade strike while simultaneously firing his energy weapon at point-blank range. The blast caught Gorth in the shoulder, spinning the creature around and burning through its natural armor plating before the champion could recover. Hyuk was behind it, striking with a vibro knife at the exact spot where the spine connected to the skull. His military training had included detailed anatomy studies of dozens of alien species. He knew exactly where to cut to cause maximum damage without causing immediate death. Gorth roared in pain and fury as its legs gave out, but it was not finished yet. The creature spun on the ground, slashing with its blade arms in wide arcs that would have cut a normal opponent in half, but Hyuk was no longer where the blades expected him to. Beatty fight lasted exactly 43 seconds. When it was over, Gorth lay broken and bleeding on the floor of its trophy room. The mighty champion who had never lost a battle had been systematically dismantled by a human father armed with military training and unlimited motivation. Hyuk stood over the dying creature and spoke his final words to it. "You thought humans were weak. You thought we were entertainment. You thought wrong. My son is avenged, and your kind will remember this day forever." Then he left the champion to die alone, surrounded by the trophies of its former victories. The creature that had killed his son would never kill again. The message had been delivered in terms that the entire galaxy would understand. Commander Yuck stood in the center of the arena where his son had died just hours before. The metal floor was cracked and broken, now stained with the blood of dozens of aliens who had thought themselves safe behind their technology and their wealth. Around him, the facility burned as explosions continued to rock the structure he had systematically destroyed. The communication array was still functioning exactly as he had planned. He had spent precious time ensuring that this one system would survive the destruction because the message he was about to send needed to reach every corner of the galaxy. It needed to be heard by every species that had participated in or profited from the barbaric entertainment that had cost his son his life. Yuck activated the emergency broadcast system that was designed to warn the galaxy about dangerous criminals or escaped prisoners. The irony was not lost on him as he prepared to use their own communication network to deliver a message that would change everything. He adjusted the transmission to reach every major communication hub, every news network, every government facility. The camera systems throughout the arena complex were still recording, feeding live images to networks across the galaxy. What they showed was devastation beyond imagination. The mighty arena that had been considered impregnable was now a burning ruin. Thousands of the galaxy's most powerful individuals lay dead or wounded. Their perfect system of control had been reduced to rubble by one human. Father Yuck looked directly into the main camera and began to speak. His voice was calm and controlled, showing no emotion but somehow making his words more terrifying than any scream of rage could have been. Behind him, fires burned and smoke rose from the wreckage of what had once been a symbol of alien superiority over lesser species. My name is Commander Yuck, he said, speaking in Galactic standard so that every species could understand his words today. You killed my son for your entertainment. You thought humans were weak, pathetic creatures that existed for your amusement. You thought we would simply accept whatever you did to us without consequence. You were wrong. The transmission was being received by billions of beings across hundreds of worlds in government buildings, military headquarters, and private homes. Creatures that had never heard of humans before were learning about them in the most dramatic way possible. The images of destruction spoke louder than any diplomatic message ever. Could you see the ruins around me? He continued, gesturing to the devastation. This was your greatest arena, your most secure facility, your symbol of power over the species you considered inferior. One human father with nothing left to lose reduced it to burning metal in less than 6 hours. Let that lesson sink in before you decide what humans really are. On distant worlds, alien leaders were calling emergency meetings. Military commanders were reassessing their intelligence about human capabilities. Beings who had dismissed humanity as irrelevant were suddenly very interested in learning more about this species that could apparently turn from peaceful researchers into instruments of destruction. This is not revenge, Yuck said, his voice never changing from its deadly calm. This is a warning. You have treated my species as entertainment, as slaves, as disposable creatures that exist for your pleasure. That ends today. Any species, any government, any individual that harms a human being will answer to all of humanity. The message was being recorded and transmitted to every corner of the galaxy. News networks interrupted their regular programming to broadcast the images of the burning arena. Governments that had never acknowledged humanity's existence were suddenly very concerned about their policies regarding human prisoners and slaves. We are not your victims, he continued. We are not your toys. We are not your entertainment. We are humans, and today you learned what that means. We love our children more than our own lives. We will burn down your entire civilization before we allow them to be harmed for your amusement. We have the skills, the determination, and the weapons to make that promise a reality. The camera pulled back to show the full scope of the destruction. The arena that had hosted thousands of fights over decades was now twisted metal and falling. Debris. Emergency vehicles that had tried to respond lay scattered and broken. The rescue efforts had failed completely, leaving the facility to burn itself out around the galaxy. Alien species that had built their entertainment industries on forcing other beings to fight and die were shutting down their operations. Gladiatorial arenas across dozens of worlds went dark as owners realized they could no longer guarantee the safety of their operations. The economic impact was immediate and devastating. You thought you understood violence because you Watched it as entertainment, Hyuk said, but his next words carried a chill that made even hardened military leaders shiver across the galaxy. You have never seen real violence. Real violence is what happens when you threaten our family's real violence. Is what I have shown you today. The transmission showed not just the destruction but also bodies of the arena staff, the defeated champion, the wealthy spectators who had paid to watch children die. The message was clear: this was not random destruction. This was precise, calculated warfare conducted by someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Every human in this galaxy is someone else's child, someone else's parent, someone else's family. We remember our dead and we never forgive those who kill them. You wanted to see what humans could do when we stopped being civilized. Now you know the price of that knowledge is everything you see burning around. Space ports throughout the galaxy began receiving requests from previously unknown human communities, asking for passage to their homeworlds. Human slaves that alien governments had not even known existed were suddenly demanding their freedom, backed by the implied threat of what might happen if that freedom was denied. I could have escaped. I could have run away and left you to your games, but that would have taught you nothing. You need to understand that actions have consequences. You needed to learn that humans are not the weak species you believed us to be. You needed a demonstration of what we become when you hurt our children. The final camera angle showed Hyuk standing alone in the center of the ruined arena, his son's blood still visible on the cracked floor beneath his feet. Behind him, the facility continued to burn, lighting up the alien sky with an orange glow that could be seen for hundreds of kilometers. The symbolism was unmistakable. The old order was ending in fire. My son died in this place for your entertainment, he said, and his voice finally showed a hint of the pain